Well, in the US, election season, election fever is well and truly underway and has taken over. And you could not miss that fact at the CPAC conference, which has just concluded in the US. Unfortunately, I had to come home a little bit early and I wasn't able to be there for that. However, we have the joy of being joined by our North America correspondent, Julie Hartman, who's going to fill us in. Julie, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Topher. Thanks for having me.
Well, in an election year, the CPAC conference is always going to be a bit of a circus. It is always going to be about who's in the primaries and their push to try and win over the Conservative voters, the Conservative donors, and try and impress those people. This year was no exception. Donald Trump seemed to be pretty keen to try and make the conference his own. What were your thoughts?
I thought that he gave a fantastic speech. I listened to all 1 hour and 26 minutes of it. And he talked about how his 2024 election run is really about liberation and judgment. Liberation from the radical left and judgment of those who have led us to this point. I mean, we are just facing crisis after crisis, whether it's at our border, whether it's in our schools. There's actually just a law that is being proposed in the state of Illinois, which would say that if a parent refuses to give their child gender-affirming care or refuses to allow their minor child to have an abortion, they can be classified as an abusive parent and have their child taken away from them. So he just touched on all of those themes of how we have two groups in this country with fundamentally incompatible views of what America is. And we need, as I said, and as he said, liberation and judgment.
Well, it sounds like it's quite a strident tone that he's taken. Now, that, of course, is the way of things in the US political system. You have your primary season and people tend to try and appeal to their base during the primary season. And then once they've secured the nomination, there is a tendency in the past for language to moderate and people to then try and appeal to voters who might be swinging voters or voters on the other side. Do you think that this is representative of the new Donald Trump, or are we going to see a situation once again, if he does get elected, where in reality, and this is my opinion, you can disagree if you like, he didn't really deliver on a lot of his rhetoric in his first 4 years as president?
Do you mean his more draconian rhetoric, or do you mean his promises of how of the kind of laws that he would pass and how he would rule?
Well, he made a lot of promises about financial responsibility, about bringing back business and these sorts of things. We didn't really see a lot of that. We saw him deliver on some of his promises, but I would characterize his first 4 years as 4 years where he really didn't live up to the promises and the expectations that, in my opinion, he gave to the world. Is this going to play out again, or do you think that he's really got a determination to actually deliver this time?
Well, I would respectfully disagree with you. I think that
Sure.
he actually carried through on a lot of promises. I mean, certainly the southern border, he initiated the remain in Mexico policy instead of catch and release into the country. When he was president, the amount of border interactions was at about 330,000 per year. And now it's skyrocketed up to 2.7 million. I thought he was excellent on that. I think he was excellent as far as support of law enforcement. He actually passed a prison reform act, which was great, called the First Step Act. He was strong on Israel, of course, facilitating the historic Abraham Accords. So I think he did follow through on his promises. However, he had a lot of pushback and a lot of roadblocks up from his opposition. But as far as the way that he's going to govern in the future, I think he has redoubled in his motivation to save our country from the disaster that has ensued under these 3 years of President Biden.
Well, you mentioned pushback there, and there's certainly been pushback against what he had to say at CPAC. These are some headlines and things that you brought to my attention, Julie. Talk us through how have they come to the conclusion here in this example, where they say that Trump promises ultimate and absolute revenge? I mean, that sounds like quite a dangerous piece of rhetoric.
Of course, you look at that headline and you think, my gosh, is that draconian and scary? We're looking at the Telegraph UK, which is, of course, not an American news outlet, but a Western news outlet. And their headline is that he promises, as you said, ultimate and absolute revenge. The Guardian also wrote, my ultimate and absolute revenge. Trump gives chilling, CPAC speech on presidential agenda, and they call him unbound and unhinged. This is just another example of the media completely lying lying and misrepresenting what he said. There's a famous example in 2017 where there was a neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, protesting the removal of the Robert E. Lee Confederate statue. And there were also people at that rally. There was neo-Nazis, Antifa, but there were also people who just independently of those groups were protesting the removal of the statue because they didn't want, their history to be removed. Trump called those people good people, and then the media spun it that he was saying that neo-Nazis were good people. So this is what those news outlets are doing. But I have a clip, if you could play it, of what Trump actually said with regard to the revenge thing.
For hardworking Americans, November 5th will be our new Liberation Day, but for the liars and cheaters and fraudsters and censors and imposters who have commandeered our government, it will be their Judgment Day. Their Judgment Day. Your victory will be our ultimate vindication. Your liberty will be our ultimate reward, and the unprecedented success of the United States of America will be my ultimate and absolute revenge. That's what I want. Success will be our revenge. A vote for Trump is your ticket back to freedom. It's your passport out of tyranny, and it's your only escape from Joe Biden and his gang's fast track to hell. And in many ways, we're living in hell right now. I stand before you today not only as your past and hopefully future president, but as a proud political dissident. I am a dissident.
Now, notice what he said there. He said that success will be our ultimate and absolute revenge. And he said, that's what I want.
And the success of America. He wasn't even talking about his success in the election. He was talking about America returning to being a world-leading and successful country, more successful than ever before. I can't help but notice that that very video that we played there was posted by The Telegraph, the same people that then also put up this very, very twisted headline and twisted take on the very video that they posted.
Yes, well, I mean, that's they just it's right in front of them. The evidence is right in front of them that their headline was twisted, and yet they don't correct it. It's very deceitful.
Now, CPAC's been interesting for me for other reasons as well. Javier Milei took time out of his obviously very busy schedule as president of Argentina, ramming through some amazing reforms there. In my opinion, one of the most exciting heads of state that we've seen in my lifetime. He did go to CPAC. He did meet Trump. Trump was very, very complimentary of Milei. Now, I also have to notice that RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is also trying to run as a presidential candidate as an independent, he's come out very, very clearly saying that he is going to copy the Milei playbook if he were to be elected as president. What do you think the RFK factor is going to be in this election? Putting aside the optimistic view that some people have that he could win, historically that's an exceptionally unlikely outcome, but his presence in the race could change the outcome. And we have seen that historically with third-party candidates before.
Oh, yes. We've seen it with Ralph Nader, with Ross Perot in various elections where third-party candidates can take a lot of votes away from representatives or the nominees, if you will, of the two parties. And I think that RFK Jr. is very poised to do the same thing. I actually did a segment on my show, Timeless, with Julie Hartman about him. And many polls are showing that he will probably take more votes away from Biden than he will from Trump, though surely he will also take votes away from Trump. But the Democratic National Committee is, in fact, so worried about this. They're so threatened by RFK Jr. that they have put up billboards in Michigan, Topher, which say that RFK Jr. is, quote, powered by MAGA. RFK Jr. is certainly not powered by MAGA. He's an independent. He differs with Donald Trump on many things. I happen to respect him immensely. I have met him. He is a class act. But it just shows you how terrified the left is that he, in fact, is going to perhaps sway this election in favor of Donald Trump.
Well, it is quite an extraordinary thing. I had the unexpected pleasure of actually being at Mar-a-Lago in Florida for a Trump campaign event, the Trumpettes event that happened just a few weeks ago. And it was quite an extraordinary thing. All I can do, when Trump comes into that room, all I can say is it's like he is Taylor Swift for 50 and 60-year-old multimillionaires. Obviously, people being invited to a fundraising event at Mar-a-Lago tend to be very, very wealthy. And they were quite literally jockeying and shouldering each other to try and get up to the velvet rope to have the chance of shaking his hand. The level of enthusiasm is completely off the charts. We're seeing that in the primaries. Donald Trump has completely dominated the Republican primaries. Nikki Haley just lost badly to Donald Trump in her own home state. Do you believe that anything can go wrong for Trump from a getting the Republican nomination point of view? Do you think that's in the bag for him? And assuming that he does get that nomination, how do you see this election playing out?
Oh, I think it's in the bag that he will get the Republican nomination. As you just said, he defeated Nikki Haley in Nikki Haley's own state, where she was the governor, South Carolina. You know, Topher, as far as what's going to happen in the election, it's so difficult to tell. And this is a very controversial opinion to have in the United States, though I don't care. I'll say it anyway. But I think that they will try to rig this election like they tried to rig the 2020 election. Now, of course, rigging an election is different from stealing it. We can't say affirmatively whether the election was stolen. But big tech absolutely rigged the election by removing the Hunter Biden laptop story 3 weeks before the election. It has been alleged. There's actually a case going to the Supreme Court that the Biden campaign colluded with big tech to suppress anti-vaccine conservative content. We know that Mark Zuckerberg gave $450 million to privatize elections in various states, and laws were changed about identification, signatures. So I think that if they did it then, they're going to be up to some antics now. And it's just very sad that we're now at this place where many people doubt the results of this election. And the final thing that I'll say is that, you know, for all of the Trump supporters who are called election deniers, and they are smeared and vilified in the United States for questioning the fairness of the 2020 election. It amazes me that the people who accused Donald Trump of colluding with Russia in 2016 were not called election deniers. When Donald Trump took office, they launched that bogus investigation into him, which proved to be false. Why aren't those people smeared with the same label that Donald Trump supporters are? The answer is that conservatives are vilified and discriminated against in this country and are treated unequally to their left-wing counterparts. And that is why Donald Trump has such support. But I don't know what they'll do this November. It's going to be a dramatic ride, that's for sure.
Well, it certainly is. And excuse me, it's a dramatic ride with implications for the entire world, including here in Australia. So I would like to go back to the 4 years where Donald Trump was president and no new wars were started. That was certainly one of his achievements that I can very much get behind. And I would like to see him back in office, if for no greater reason than just for that alone. Julie Hartman, North America Correspondent, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Topher.